So just briefly going over the definitions of the three equities again. Brand equity is the reputation among end customers that a supplier has earned for providing superior value through its products and services. And then channel equity is the reputation among resellers, intermediaries, that a manufacturer or supplier has earned for providing superior value to those resellers. And then finally, reseller equity is the reputation among customers that a intermediary, a retailer, for instance, has earned for providing superior value to those end customers. So in terms of how we manage channel members, it's an ongoing iterative process, and it starts out by selecting the channel members. So as you can see, we have to pick the right channel members. So if you choose the wrong channel members where your goals are misaligned or you're not on the same page, you have different value systems, they're opportunistic, then, that's not going to work. So selecting channel members, being very selective in choosing who you're going to work with is very important. That's the first priority. And then you need to train your channel members, educate the channel members so that they are fully aware of what your goals are, how you want your products to be pushed, to be promoted, and to be serviced to the customers. And then the third is motivating the channel members, providing them incentives so that they will work on your behalf, so that they have your self-interest in their minds as well. And then the fourth is evaluating the channel members. Obviously, at some point, you're going to have to conduct a performance evaluation in terms of how well or how poorly these channel members are performing in relation to how you've set the goals out initially. So is there a discrepancy between the goals that you've set out and the performance of these channel members, or is there very little discrepancy? So at the end of the day, eventually, on a continuing basis, you're going to have to evaluate, monitor and evaluate their performance. And then you're going to have to modify their channel members. If they're not performing well, if they haven't lived up to your expectations, then you're going to have to modify. Modifying meaning that you're going to have to maybe change their channel members or punish their channel members, or just basically, you're going to have to do something so that their behaviors are aligned with the goals that you've set out. Next, we can talk about vertical integration, where on this value chain, let's say that we have a manufacturer A. So A could be a manufacturer or supplier, and B would be a retailer, and C can be considered a raw material supplier firm. So if you're a manufacturer and you own your own retailer, so like the manufacturer Apple is a manufacturer of cell phones, but recently, now they have Apple stores. Apple Store, that's a retailing environment. That's a retailer, which they didn't have before. So now they have integrated forward. So we call this forward integration, when a manufacturer now also operates its own retail environment to get closer to the end customer. So it's going downstream. So why would Apple do that? Well, there's, we can think of various reasons, multiple reasons why a manufacturer such as Apple would want to forward integrate and own and operate its own stores. But one thing that comes to mind is that they would have a lot more control over how they want their products to be promoted, how they want their products to be serviced, and so forth to the end customers, as opposed to relying on a third party or distributor such as Best Buy. And then going from A to C, if Apple, let's say, backward integrated and owned a lot of, if it owned companies or firms that manufactured the components, electric components that went into manufacturing a cellular phone, then that would be considered backward integration. So backward integration occurs when a manufacturer gets closer to and owns and operates raw materials that go into the final product, whereas forward integration is when a manufacturer owns and operates a retail environment, a store or a firm that gets closer to the end customer. So now we can talk about distribution strategies and whether they have to be localized or adapted when they go global, or can distribution strategies be standardized. And to make a long story short, there's three factors that push companies, firms, when they global, to engage in a localized or more of an adaptive distribution strategy as opposed to a standardized distribution strategy. And these three factors or elements are culturally distinct distribution behavior, distributive institution rigidity, and international functional fragmentation. So culturally distinct distribution behavior occurs when a company goes overseas globally and needs to work with a partner to distribute its products. There's a lot of cultural nuances, there's a lot of cultural norms or values or business practices that are just simply culturally different. Therefore, they have to be very sensitive to how business is practiced, how cultures dictate how businesses are performed between companies, between a distributor when going overseas. So that sort of pushes companies when they go overseas to engage in more of a localized or adaptive distribution strategy. And the same thing can be said for institution rigidity, because a lot of the times these working relationships between companies in a distribution network, they are influenced by macro environmental constraints such as the legal environment, or between unions, between union laws, contracts, legal issues. These are institutionalized rules that are very difficult to change in a very short period of time. So they have to abide by and they have to follow these institutionalized macro environmental rules that govern how business practice should be done between companies in a distribution network. And then the third is international functional fragmentation, which means that when you go global, the same distributor may perform different functions, compared to your home market when you go, internationally. So, for instance, when you use a distributor in your home market, it may be the norm for the distributor to perform, promotion activities or to support your product or to engage in after-sales service. Whereas the same type of distributor in an international setting, in a global setting, may not be obliged to, or the norm or the business practice may not be to practice or to support, after-sales service, or to, engage in promotions to push your product to the end customer. So the international functional fragmentation suggests that the same distributor may be performing different types of, functional activities when they go global. So these three elements collectively reinforce each other to the point where a standardized distribution strategy becomes a challenge when a company goes global, and it pushes companies to gravitate towards more of a localized or adaptive distribution strategy. So this slide again sort of summarizes the previous slide in the sense that these three strategies force companies to be more adaptive, to be aware of their local surroundings, and therefore push companies to become more localized and adaptive in terms of how they exercise and implement their distribution strategies when they go global. And this framework shows you that these three elements that we just talked about are self-reinforcing. They feed off of each other and they reinforce each other, where that's what we call it, a reverse synergistic effect. So there's a synergistic effect in terms of they reinforce one another to the point where it becomes a challenge for companies to implement a standardized distribution strategy when they go global.